Hey everyone, welcome to Group Text. I'm starting today with the riddle. What's black and white and red all over? Okay, I'm going to tell you the answer. It's most of the Victorian era costumes that today's guest, Eric McCormack, wears in the 5th season of the horror anthology show Slasher Ripper. New episodes air every Thursday on AMC Plus and streaming on Shudder. Eric is a star of stage and screen and has appeared in series like Perception and Travelers, to name just a few, but of course is best known for playing Will Truman for 11, God, that's a long time, seasons on NBC's groundbreaking hit comedy Will and Grace. So, without further ado, please welcome to Group Text the star of the very terrifying show, Eric McCormack. Good morning, good afternoon. I don't even know where we are anymore.
My father used to tell that red, black and white, red all over joke, and it was all his funny answer was a nun falling down the stairs.
Yeah, there's a million answers, but I gotta say, before I go any further, you are Canadian by birth, and I want to point out that terrifying and Canadian is an oxymoron.
It's true. We generally tend to lack a terrifying quality, which we're relatively proud of, and then we apologize for how proud we are of.
Exactly. But it's you, Ryan Reynolds, talented, smart, attractive men. You, Ryan Reynolds, and Martin Short, of course.
And Ryan Gosling. Yes, we come from good, hearty Canadian stock, and then we just threw the hardiness away and became actors. So
you became an American citizen.
Yeah.
Now, I got to ask, was it that you and Ryan Reynolds, I mean, couldn't you have both stayed on a work visa all these years?
Here's the thing. I mean, we're dual citizens. That's the nice reciprocity here. I'm a citizen of both countries. I would never have given up my Canadian citizenship, but I could gain my American one in order to vote, which is everything. So I was campaigning for Al Gore when I was still just on green card, and I thought, this makes no sense. Who's going to listen to me if I can't put my money where my mouth is? So I became a citizen in, I think it was 99. It was 1 year into Will and Grace.
Well, there's a joke there, of course, which is I was campaigning for Al Gore before it was cool to campaign for Al Gore.
It was. So I was just hitting the cool at the time. We were. I feel who was it? Jesse L. Martin and myself and a few other people were going to other cities, but well, we all know how that went.
Yes, we do. You literally just turned 60 on April 18th. Happy belated birthday. What? So as a friend pointed out to me, do you realize if you were still playing Will, I believe you would now be called what the boys like to call a zaddy.
I know. I just learned this expression.
Yes.
I had just gotten used to the possibility that maybe I was a daddy, and now I've missed it.
But we'll get to Will and Grace later on. First, I want to talk about Ripper. Okay. Wow.
Slasher Ripper. It's, for those that haven't heard of it, I didn't know the show. There's 4 seasons of it, all of them great. All of them separate. You don't have to watch the first 4 seasons necessarily because each season is different. This one is called Ripper because it has a Jack the Ripper feel. It takes place at the turn of the century, and it is a gothic horror. I feel like it's if Tarantino did a turn of the century gothic horror, that it would be this.
Yeah, I can agree with you. You play Basil Garvey, who is a rich and powerful businessman with a dark past who controls the Victorian era Toronto underworld. Now, I'm going to go that this is very much against type for you. So what drew you to this role? Because this, when you think Eric McCormack, you don't think, covered in blood.
True. But I was so many years in a Shakespeare company and in drama before I was 35 when I got Will Truman. So in fact, the role I had when I met my wife just before Will and Grace was a similar role, except it was on a Western. It was on Lonesome Dove, and I played Colonel Clay Mosby, and he was a bastard, particularly in the second season. He was kind of like a young Basil Garvey. So in a strange way for me and for the few people that knew me from that role, This is kind of coming full circle, and it's so much fun. I mean, I don't really love playing horribly violent men, but to play men who have seized power and abused their power, particularly at this particular time in history, is a fascinating. It's a fascinating thing. I mean, from at one part, this is just fun. I mean, I had so much fun playing a total asshole, but the other part was having to come to grips with the fact that there are guys like this out there, and we elect them.
I love that. I love that you said that. So you also have a potty mouth on the show, and I can't remember that we've ever heard you swear, let alone drop the number of F-bombs.
Yeah.
Was that hard for you to do, or do those sort of things just roll off the tip of your tongue like in my family?
Oh, God, they've been stored up, Melissa. When you do enough television, they build in you. And, like congealed arteries, and you just have to explode with them. Yeah, it's very, very easy. In fact, I don't know what I can and can't say on this show, but I got.
No, you can say. By the way, you can say whatever you want. I'm like, in my family, you got more in trouble for not fucking cursing rather than fucking cursing.
I think I was 2 scenes into the pilot of this when they'd sent it and offered it. I was reading it. I think I was 2 scenes in when the young preacher turns to me and says, "Mr. Garvey, you must repent. God wants you." And before he can go on, I say, "Fuck your God."
Ooh.
Okay, well, I'm in. So I said, I need read no more. So yeah, he's that kind of a guy, and so which is great because you're supposed to hate him. He's supposed to be dangerous and not lovable, so that we can build to what we're building to.
Yes, but this is the 5th season, and the whole anthology. This season actually upends, in my opinion, the horror genre in a lot of ways. Were you a fan of traditional horror?
Well, for me, growing up, traditional horror was, the Universal pictures and, Frankenstein and Dracula and stuff. So probably the last horror film that I was really into, like The Exorcist and The Shining. I haven't stayed with the genre as it's grown. I just read an article the other day about how huge it is now for young people, that it is beloved and it is sophisticated, and of course with Scream all those years ago, a humor came into it. It was always a pretty humorless genre, and now I think on a show like ours, we really mix all that up. It's new to me. This was not my world, and to see somebody, I saw when the show started, I started to look for reviews, and of course all the reviews are from gore heavy, genre heavy writers, because they love it. They're familiar with all 4 of the previous seasons, and they have a lot of expectations. So we had a lot to live up to.
There is a lot. You brought up gore. There's a lot of, blood and skin and fingernails. Did you ever walk on set and go, "Oh God, that looks too real"? Or do you pick the things up and play with them and then put them down?
There's a lot of gore going on that has nothing to do with me.
Yes.
In fact, I'm actually one of many characters that is kind of threatened by this mysterious killer called the Widow. It's possible it's me. But
could be.
I think by this point, we're 6 episodes in now, I think that I think we know it's probably not. But who is it? We don't know. So I had this one scene, I think it was in the 3rd episode, where I basically kill my henchman and I cut off his ear, and in a barn with goats. And I had so much fun, and the ear had a special thing in it. It was going to spurt blood, and I had the knife and I had to stay on this really intense shit. And I kind of got it. And then once I had the ear in my hand, then it's hard not to, because I had to then throw it and feed it to the goats.
Yeah, it's hard not to pick those. I was just reading a story, and I forgot it was 2 major actors, and they were in a big war scene, and they were between takes, they were joking around because there are all these dead bodies and stomping on the hands, and apparently one of them actually stomped on an extra.
Oh God.
And the guy's like, ah!
Oh God, that would, yeah. I hope that was a number of years ago, because right nowadays that would not go.
Oh yeah, no, it was a long time ago. So River takes place in Toronto in the
Yeah.
Victorian era. News of Jack the Ripper has made its way across the Atlantic.
Right.
Your character's wrapped up in a bizarre murders being investigated. So you, Eric, are from Toronto. What was it like being on set in your hometown being recreated? I mean, I guess what I'm really trying to ask is, did you ever have the urge to go over and like hang a sign just as a joke that says future home of Tim Hortons? I mean, I love Munchkin, by the way.
You love what? Munchkin?
I love the Tim Horton, the little, aren't they Munchkins?
Timbits, I think, but maybe they're.
Timbits.
Yeah. How can you not?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I left Toronto 30 years ago for Vancouver, and then Vancouver to LA. So I haven't lived in my hometown in a long time. But when I get back there for work, I just love it. Both my brother and sister live downtown, so I always stay right in the center of town so I can see them. And to think, when people hear Victorian Toronto, it probably doesn't mean anything to them. But I mean, Toronto is almost as old a city as New York or
Mm-hmm.
it's sort of, it's the first big cosmopolitan city, and a lot of the buildings there kind of look like downtown New York or Harvard or someplace. So the Toronto was expanding so much in 1900, and my grandparents would have been a part of all that. So it really was cool to not just be, it's okay, it's 120 years ago, but it's 120 years ago in this city I grew up in my parents' city, which I think a lot of people don't even know. Even people that live in Toronto don't realize how flourishing and cosmopolitan it was back in the day.
In another sort of strange departure from traditional horror, the show allows violence, women on women, women on men. It's got to, portraying that kind of violence, it's got to be hard to convince, and I guess this is more from the writer's point of view, the network to feel comfortable with that.
Well, we've gotten to a point now. You and I grew up at a time when you had to use double entendres to get the network to agree to a joke, or you couldn't, so you couldn't show that. You had to hint at. And nowadays, streaming networks in particular, they want buttons pushed. They need that new audience that doesn't want their parents' TV. So I think in this case, Ian and Aaron, who write the show, were given sort of a carte blanche. Just go, surprise us, shock even the full-time fans, shock them, which is kind of amazing. I wanted to add too that one of the this isn't just about violence and gore. At the heart of it, there's, at least from my character, he falls in love with the woman. Now, she happens to be 40 years younger than he does, and he basically buys her as a bride. So he's still a horrible asshole. But it was interesting to play a guy that was so heartless and yet is finding redemption, as the audience has been watching up till this point. There are some really amazing scenes that we got to play, and this young actress, Sadie LaFlamme Snow, who's been sort of breaking out on a show called The Way Home. She's amazing, and the sort of the combination of terror and slowly falling for this some father figure. Those scenes are really interesting, and some of the most it's the most fun I've had to play in all these years, because they're dark and they're surprising.
But that's the kind of dynamic that is portrayed through the series that makes it a hit and gets it to its fifth season. It's those kinds of interpersonal story development, all those kinds of things that allow everything else. Yeah,
I agreed. I mean, it's there's a sophistication that has come with horror over the last few years, where it's not enough just to sort of Blumhouse it and show arms and legs falling off. You have to be invested in these characters. And the great thing about this particular show, it's essentially a mystery. I mean, it's like a good old-fashioned Agatha Christie mystery, if Agatha Christie was hacking people in half. But you really, people really, I'd be surprised if anyone
I'm sorry. That is one of the best lines I've heard. It would be, I could say, it's like Agatha Christie if she had a chainsaw.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, I mean, at this point, I think it's still quite a mystery. If you're just catching up, you still won't know who the widow is.
Again, what I found fascinating or find fascinating is that it's really, and I mentioned that earlier, turned the genre a little bit upside down. I mean, with Jamie Lee Curtis in Halloween, she introduces to the quote unquote virgin savior, which is a formula that a lot of things still rely on, where Ripper is so plain spoken. I mean, the characters use, like we talked about, profanity. The cast is unflinchingly diverse.
Yeah.
This feels to me like it really does help break the traditional genre.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and again, I'm not an expert on the growth of it over the last 30, 40 years. But
Eric, why aren't you?
I know.
Didn't you know?
I have no excuse, Melissa. But yeah, it did go from just all these innocent people being killed and chased by some mysterious. No one in this is innocent, with the exception possibly of my young bride. Everybody else are people that might have this coming, and we discover why. We discover what happened years ago that has led them all to be in the crosshairs of this killer. And so it just makes it more complicated, and just the fact that you can be darkly funny is so great. It does not take itself too seriously, but as you mentioned, which I think is so important, the diversity of this cast, and it's we've got to a point where it's unapologetic. You don't have to say, well, I know that maybe that character at that time would be like, no, here, this is the world. This is how the world is we're presenting it, and it's great. It was really great to see how much effort they put into making it diverse, surprising, diverse in a gender way. I mean, it's great.
Well, speaking of that, you tend to find yourself in these kinds of shows that are hits. Speaking of diverse, Will and Grace. I looked back and I realized when it premiered, I got this written down, it would seem to be the heyday of these brilliant ensembles. You had Frasier, Third Rock from the Sun, Friends, Everybody Loves Raymond, all at the same time. So I got to ask, that was sort of the heyday of these wonderful ensembles. And I always like to ask, did you feel the chemistry from episode 1, season 1, table read?
I'm trying to remember the first table read, but certainly by the time we shot the pilot a week later, yes. Particularly Messing and I knew that we had something. We just knew that, okay, this is what they call the chemistry. I was 35 when we shot it, so I'd been around. I was very aware of all the shows you just mentioned, desperately wanted to be a part of something like that. I wanted my Seinfeld, I wanted my Friends, and this felt like it from the beginning. And to think within a few episodes, the four of us were finishing each other's sentences, certainly on screen. We understood each other comedically, and we really made each other laugh, which was huge.
The year you won your Emmy, I dug deep on this one. Your fellow nominees. Do you ever think back on this? Kelsey Grammer, John Lithgow, Frankie Muniz, and Ray Romano. Now, if that ain't a rogues gallery of comedy, I'm not quite sure what is. Did you ever think when you were starting out or when you started the show that your name would be mentioned with these comedic heavyweights, let alone beat them in a not a popularity contest, but for the quality of your work?
Well, A, no. B, sort of, because that's all I dreamed of. I didn't dream necessarily of an Emmy, but I dreamed of a time when people that I respected would respect me back. And so that was really huge. And also that was around the time I learned that it's not just a popularity contest, but in fact, you are judged by the very specific episode that you submit.
Right.
And I remember, so it doesn't mean, so if Kelsey Grammer has just a brilliant episode every year, as he always did, it was very easy to win 2, 3, 4 times in a row, or Julia Louis-Dreyfus. In the case of Will and Grace, when we started, I thought to myself in season 1, if we ever do a flashback to when Will came out, that'll be Miami. And it was. So it's just one of those things where the material can take what you're already doing and just sort of cement something. And that was writing. Jeff Greenstein wrote that episode, and it was brilliant.
You brought that up. The character of Will was an anomaly at the time. It was the first that I can remember realistic portrayal of what a lot of gay men are like, and it was no way a caricature. When you were first did you realize that it was groundbreaking, or if you let your mind go there, I would think that would be an overwhelming thought in putting pressure on yourself about the importance of the character, and then go and be funny.
Yeah, it was a piece of timing where we were just, in my mind anyway, we were past that moment of, if you play a gay character, you'll ruin your career. And we were just before that period of time where it's like, to play a gay character, you have to be gay. I kind of was able to just slot in and be an advocate and be the best sort of version of Will Truman that I could. And luckily it was helpful. I mean, we were just trying to be funny, but it was helpful to a lot of people, particularly a lot of young men that have come up to me over the years, and they're not young anymore. They just say, when I was young, I would watch this with my mother. But now, because we're all on streaming services, now I'm getting young men again coming up saying, thank you for this character. And I'm like, wow, it's a sitcom. It's not supposed to help mankind. It's kind of amazing that it had any kind of wonderful repercussions.
There was backlash at the time.
There was a little, but I think, we were gentle with it at first. Certainly the network was gentle in how they promoted it, perhaps to a fault. That first season was like, it's about 2 best friends, but when so Sean Hayes and I have started a Will and Grace Rewatch podcast, which we will be launching in June. We've recorded we're just going to go through all the episodes. We've done the first 8 or so at this point, and it is amazing to go back, which I've done a lot. Sean hasn't. Sean has really not watched the show. So for him, it's a voyage of discovery rather than rediscovery. And we were unapologetic. I mean, the banter, particularly between Jack and Will, was 2 gay men being bitchy at each other and funny with each other and loving with each other, and it's from the start. So I'm proud to think that even though in my mind we maybe soft soaped it a bit, we were pretty out there from the beginning.
It's just, anyone who hasn't gone back and watched the whole thing on streaming is dumb. In my personal opinion, because I've gone back, and I went back after my son left for college and rewatched a lot of my favorite series from the first season, because it was like comfort food for me, and I knew I would laugh.
Exactly, and certainly, between COVID and kids going off to college, suddenly we got a lot of time to rediscover.
I was so bad, I slept in my son's room for like 2 weeks. I couldn't cope with his room being empty, but that's for my therapist, not for you. You had a cavalcade of guest stars.
Yeah.
Who, and I don't mean to think on this, but I am. Who were you excited? I'm trying to figure out how to say this. Who were you so excited to work with that you were actually speechless? I remember the interviews on the red carpet that I did where someone just, I lost the ability to think and speak at the same time.
There was a few of those. Gene Wilder, for sure. I would say Elton John, except by the time Elton was on the show, I had known him a bit, but certainly the first time I met Elton, I was pretty speechless. The one that always comes to mind, because in many ways he was the first big name we had on the show, and he played my father, was Sidney Pollack. Oh. And Sidney, because of Tootsie in particular, was a huge hero for me. And it was so early on in the run that we hadn't gotten sort of used to another guest star this week. So that one, I remember, really floored me. And the first episode we had was a bit emotional one where he sort of admits that even though he's been acting okay with it his whole ever since I came out, he really hasn't been sort of lying to people at work that Grace was my wife. And we had this incredibly emotional scene in a men's bathroom in New York, and it just floored me that I got to do that with him. That one really sticks with me.
God, he was brilliant. Brilliant at everything he touched. You were, speaking of brilliant, you were on some incredible shows across the board. You know, Ally McBeal, Law & Order, New Adventures of Old Christine, which was a big show for you. Travelers, I could go on and on and on. Is there one show that you looked at that you never got to be on? Or that one that you passed and said, why did I do that?
That's interesting. I don't really have a story of one I passed on. There were certainly ones I wish I'd done. I wish I'd had an episode of Seinfeld, you know, the way
right.
Deborah does or you know, Bryan Cranston does. It's just because those characters for that few years there, whatever you played on Seinfeld became iconic the next day. Everyone would quote. I'm working with Jason Alexander right now, and I was just marveling at 91, 92, 93. The next day, that was the water cooler show of all time. Somebody, often George, would have said something that would, you know, for the rest of history. You know, we keep saying, you know, I was in the pool or whatever it was, and I wish I'd done a Seinfeld. There was a time when there was such giant. If you did one episode of ER or something like that, you'd be seen by 28 million people or something. So I guess I wish that back in the day.
I'm just thinking out loud, so I'm sorry if I'm sounding because my notes have gone out the window because we're going down different paths. With Ripper, you've discovered a whole new legion of fans. And I always find this interesting, especially with people with my mom. They don't know the history. They only know her from the red carpets and Fashion Police. You've now got a whole legion of fans that don't know Will and Grace.
Yeah, probably. And, you know, the big one for me for that was Travelers, which I was a producer on. Then we did that from 2016 to 18 for Netflix. And it's still there. And I still encourage people to see it because it is so different than anything I'd ever done, and I'm very still and very serious in it. And it's a great young cast of really good actors, and that brought in new people that were like, wait a minute, you're the guy from the sitcom, and this one will do the same thing, I imagine. So it's my favorite thing. I have never believed in staying in my lane when it comes to being an actor at all. I'm about to go back to Broadway and do a very silly English comedy, and I can't wait. Somebody will say, why are you guys all doing accents? Why did they just hire English people? Like, no. This is why I got into this business, to put on disguises, to put on noses and hats. This is what we do. And I will always love the possibility that maybe today someone will go, I didn't think you could do that.
I read somewhere that you said, you know, it's a tragedy that the world never got to see my Hamlet, because you did a lot of Shakespeare.
I did a lot. I never did Hamlet, and I think it's a tragedy that no one. A lot of my Shakespeare. Gentleman 2 is all's well that. So there's no tragedy that I wish people had seen.
No, it was such a funny quote because you were so obviously being silly. And I was just like, it's no one's going to get to see my Hamlet. The world has been just denied something.
And so back when I was doing Shakespeare with people a little and a lot older than me, there was this very much a belief that everyone would one day give their Hamlet or give their Lear. And for me, it was the opposite. At the end of 5 seasons, I went, I think I'm not a Shakespeare guy. I think I'm meant to be on a sitcom or something.
Only 5 years for the realization.
Yeah. And because it's so intense, and it is such a. I mean, I so admire anyone that does it brilliantly, but I just, for me, I thought there's a different path, I think, for me, and there was. So
thankfully, but you brought up again, you're working with Jason Alexander.
Yes.
Which is so fun. You're going back to Broadway. You were in one of the revivals of Music Man.
Yes.
And it was 2001. Did you go to see Hugh Jackman and sit in the audience like, I did it better? Because you also got to sing it at the Hollywood Bowl.
With Kristen Chenoweth at the Bowl, yeah.
That's not too much pressure.
You know what? It was.
Meaning being on stage with Kristen.
Yeah. That was brilliant. That was one night only. 17,000 people at the Hollywood Bowl.
Oh.
Yeah. You know, I haven't seen Hugh's, so and Hugh. The one time I met Hugh, he was the loveliest of all men. So
he is.
I would not be dismissive should I see it, but no, it was just a very special point. I think it was 38. Will and Grace been on for a few years. I was given an opportunity to sort of be considered for to take over a role in, I think it was Seussical. And I happened to read that Craig Bierko was leaving the Music Man. And I just said, I want to be considered for that. And I'll always be so pleased with myself that I had just enough balls to sort of thrust myself into that situation. And I auditioned for Susan Stroman and got it and did 4 months between seasons of Will and Grace. And it was just joyous. It was just joyous. I don't know that I mean, I'm hats off to Hugh doing that role 8 shows a week is a lot. But when I was a little younger, it was fantastic.
Yeah, he's amazing and lovely and everything you just said. You and Sean are going to be on Broadway at the same time, it looks like.
We're going to be on Broadway. We're going to be on 44th Street at the same time. We are going to be half a block from each other doing these 2 different shows. By the way, I saw his show last year in Chicago. It's fantastic. So come to New York. And
yes, and by the way, and ticket sales for his show as an Oscar are through the roof.
It's a great show. He's great in it. And while you're there, come and see The Cottage right next door.
Exactly.
Will and Old Jack.
It's got to be fun working with Jason, who I know, who is hilarious.
He's hilarious, and he's a great actor. And he directed me actually 12 years ago in a production of The Fantastics here in L.A. So this is my second time with him in the director's chair. But this is such an outrageous, fun comedy with a lot of invention, a lot of physical stuff to come up with. So I'm really looking forward to seeing him on fire in that department, just coming up with crazy, hilarious shit.
Well, I can't wait to see it. Last question for you, because I would say, what are you doing next? But we know. Who would you?
There is one thing I wanted to mention, just because it's happening right now, is that I have a podcast with Steven Weber where we just sit down with other actors and yak, called Eating Out with Eric and Steve. And I wanted to just drop that, and that is what I'm doing a lot at the moment. So in addition to watching Slasher, look out for that, where podcasts are.
Everywhere podcasts are available. And you have the one with Sean.
And Sean is coming up in June, yes.
Right. So the last question, who do you want to work with that you haven't gotten to work with yet?
So many answers to that question. I think there's a part of me that is always, I wouldn't say careful what I wish for, but careful not to wish too big. Here's my easy answer 30 years ago.
Okay.
Woody Allen. So I'm not allowed to say that anymore, apparently. So so now I don't have an easy answer, but I would love to work with Spielberg and Scorsese and all the great ones, but you get to a certain age and you think, what will be, knowing who I am and who I've been and how I'm perceived, what would ever be the role that would lead to that? And so that's why I don't dream about it. I just think maybe it'll happen. Who knows? Maybe it's 68. I'm subtly right for Steven Spielberg's next spell.
How very positive and Canadian. So we've got Eating Out. Is that correct? Eating Out with Eric and Steve. We have you and Sean doing the Will and Grace Watch podcast.
Well, just Jack and Will.
Jack and Will. We have you coming up on Broadway on July 7th in the Cottage. And once again, you can catch Eric McCormack in Slasher Ripper. New episodes every Thursday on AMC Plus and streaming on Shudder. It's always so good to see you.
Great to see you, Melissa. This was so much fun. Thank you.